What do you think was going through Stalin's mind in the 20s and the 30s? Like, did he directly allow himself to acknowledge the reality of the suffering he was causing? Like, what does it take to be that human? I'm almost interested to extract lessons from that for leaders of today. Like, how hard is it? Is it that Stalin is evil, or can you just delude yourself gradually into where you don't have a sense of the effect of your policies on the populace?
Well, you're not deluding yourself because you have around you an entire government of people telling you 24/7 how great you are, how thankful they are for you, how awesome you are, you're the best. So that certainly going to play into it. I've asked myself that question as well. Like, do these people believe their own bullshit? And and I think the receipts are when Elena Ceausescu, who's one of the four women on the cover, when she's being taken away to be executed in 1989, she's yelling at the soldiers, "How could you? I raised you like a mother." So she at least believed her own bullshit. Um, with Stalin, he was obviously extremely intelligent. I think it's kind of easy for us to kind of psychologize and say he's a sociopath, he's a narcissist, he's this, he's that. Um, but at a certain point, like if you're surrounded by a culture dedicated to glorifying you, and everyone you meet is so happy to see you, and oh my God, all your pronouncements are so good. And you know what? If you make a decision that's wrong, the people around you, it's their job to tell you why it's not your fault. It's the fault of the wreckers, or it's the fault of Hitler or whoever it is, the kulaks. At a certain point, the human mind wants to believe how great it is, especially someone in that vaunted position. But he had his low. There was this one funny, I'm using the word loosely, quote, when Hitler invades Russia and he couldn't believe it. And he's just missing in action for days because how could Hitler betray me? We had a deal, birds of a feather. And he had this quote about, like, we've taken Lenin's legacy and shit it out our asses. I think he was very aware. That's no question that he was aware that in terms of being a philosopher or a thinker, he wasn't on Lenin's level, right? So that was, I'm sure, played a lot into his psychology.
That he never quite lived up to everything he tried. I mean, there's some sense of that the collectivization, that this idea was a failure. The way he responds to the economic policy being a failure is to lean in and basically torture anyone who says it's a failure and double down on the policy. Like, that says something about.
But it wasn't a failure. It broke the Ukrainians.
You don't think he believed early on that's what it turned into, but you don't think in the very early days there was a thought that collectivization is the right mechanism by which to enact communism in the
But
nation?
I think his goal was to break their spirit, and getting them fed was secondary, right? And given the fact that they stopped complaining because they're dead, he got what he wanted. He got a compliant population.
I mean, that's really interesting. I didn't. I wonder how much disagreement there is about, because if that was the goal from the beginning, that's a different level of evil.
I think that was clearly the so like I said earlier, right? He broke with Lenin because he wanted socialism in one country, right? That was his vision, right? And he was also very aware that what became the Soviet Union was extremely diverse. First, it's a gigantic country; it's the big country on Earth. It's not only gigantic; you had all these peoples, these nationalities within it that have had historical enmity, and they're not going to have loyalty to Moscow. He's a Georgian himself. This was always a big problem. So that was what he wanted to do as well, is to homogenize
Mhm.
and have them be standardized. And I don't see how you do that without either massive re-education, which is only going to go so far, or really just crushing people's spirits.
So, like a forced homogeneity.
Yeah. And the other big thing, a big element of Soviet culture and the Soviet mythology. I mean, his name was he changed his name to Stalin. I can't even pronounce his Georgian name, Jugosvili or something like that. It means man of steel. So a large part of and this still remains in Russian culture to this day. I see it in my family too, and like other Russians I know. There is this pride in ruthlessness and this kind of like, I'm so tough, like nothing's going to affect me. Like, yeah, we're going to suffer, but it's for a greater good or for the long term, and not to be kind of sentimental or squeamish about things. Like that was a big part of it.
Don't take that away from me too, Michael.
What do you
You've
mean?
taken everything.
Am I wrong?
I admire not stoicism, but that kind of hardness. I look for it in myself. It has nothing to do with Stalin.
But not to the extent that, like, if some, like, for example, like if you see someone suffering, and that's being used as a mechanism to get you to change your opinion, you're like, they're not going to get to me. Like
Right.
that is very much part of that Russian psychology.
Right. At least at that time.
Yes. I think still largely no. I'm not going to be manipulated by someone else's suffering or weakness. That kind of thing. I think that's really part of it to this day.
I don't know. I don't know how much of it is caricature, how much of it is reality.
Sure. I remember I knew someone who was him and his fiance were Russian, and they had this big fight. She took off the ring, right?
Mhm.
And she's like, and he's like, that's it. And just like the way he told the story to me, she's like, what do you want me to say? Oh, don't leave me, baby. I can't live without you. Like that nasty cruelty. Which
I don't know, man. I know you're. I don't know if there's a Russian thing. That's just a people thing.
I don't think that's an American thing.
I think there's all kinds of flavors, and they're different by region of the way that people are cruel to each other.
Sure, I'm not arguing that.
In America, New Jersey is different than Texas, is different than California.
You don't think Americans are a higher trust, more kind society than Russia, even today?
Higher trust. Listen, I'm not going to. So first of all, I have very complex feelings about Russia today.
I'm talking about let's talk about January before the war. I'm talking about nowadays.
I think it's a complex psychological dynamic of what trusting means. I think Russians are generally less friendly, but have more intimate friendships.
Yes, I think that's true.
So it's just a different.
It's not different. It's just one is more trusting.
Which is more trusting?
Americans.
But then let's define trusting different. Because
I'll give you an example. If someone's having a party in America and people come over, okay, that's fine. Everyone's welcome. If it's in Russia, it's like, who's that? Who'd you bring? And there's much more of a like, let me be sure that's okay. This person's here.
Maybe that's there.
You don't have parties.
I have never been at a party,
and you don't come to mine. Ben Askren was very sad.
Well, I love Ben.
Well, you should have showed it by showing up.
Just, man, I hide from the world, and I'm afraid of social interaction, and I just lay on the ground instead and feel sorry for myself.
It's not bad Santa. It's sad Santa.
Well, I conserve my emotional energy towards this one day of the year.
Okay.
Where I can intensely spread my joy.